Hey, Cypher here, and I wanted to review The Order. It's not a particularly popular film or anything, nor do I think it's good or notable, but it is about an important topic. Since I study American violence, the rise and fall of white supremacist terrorism recurs regularly, and I was already poised to be able to cover it. The Order, or Silent Brotherhood, has become the example that so many white supremacist hate groups wish to emulate, foundational to things like the Oklahoma City bombing, Atomwaffen, the alt-right, and QAnon. I want to tell the story myself because the movie botches its narrative in a real disappointing way. This episode is made possible by support of viewers like you. This is obviously demonetized. Team YouTube cannot withstand a video identifying the worst of white supremacy in the United States. That would be too important of history. Can't have that. They refused to monetize the preview version and may age restrict this, because we can't have historians talking about history. No! Now, this doesn't technically violate their guidelines, but we all know that human review is less than human. Want to know where you can find previews of all my work? Just go to patreon.com/cynicalhistorian. I've got a bunch of episodes ready to go. Plenty of these end up with a pretty big difference from the preview version to the final one, and $5 patrons get access to that. You could also purchase merchandise, linked below, or you can join my Twitch streams on twitch.tv/cynicalhistorian. where I stream about once or twice a week, having been doing so for years now. Sometimes I play games, sometimes I'll edit a new episode, sometimes I'll even record a new episode. And there's ways to donate on there. So that all helps me be able to produce episodes even when Team YouTube wants to suppress this history. Help my channel through such difficulties, and also give it a like and subscribe to show community support. Thanks, and on with the show. White supremacy is not a static ideology, rather one that constantly morphs to fit the zeitgeist. Following the success of the civil rights movement and counterculture during the 1960s, a white power backlash congealed and festered, joining several previous currents of white supremacy together into a hateful coalition. Neo-Nazis and Klansmen were typically opposed to each other, but found common ground in a new conspiracy theory that claimed Jews secretly controlled federal authority in order to destroy the white race. They called it the Zionist-Occupied Government, or ZOG for short. Christian identity congregations claimed God's chosen people were not Hebrews, as the Bible says, but Aryans, and that ZOG had usurped that meaning. It played off of other conspiracy theories, and when the term lost its popularity in the 1990s, other terms like New World Order or Deep State took its place, maintaining the same anti-Semitism with dog whistles like banksters and globalists. In the hopes of creating unity among these extremists, Richard Butler founded a Christian identity congregation near Hayden Lake, Idaho, on a large compound he called Aryan Nations. Bringing various hate groups together for annual meetings, they collectively argued for a separate ethno-state to save whites from miscegenation or interracial relationships, which they claimed was somehow a conspiracy to replace white people, best exemplified by the stab in the back of losing Vietnam. Demoralized veterans became the core of this resurgence of a radical right in the following decade. In 1978, a poorly written fiction novel called The Turner Diaries gave the blueprint to how to form a secret paramilitary organization that would foment a racial revolution through minor acts of sabotage that eventually built into guerrilla warfare. This culminated in what it called the Day of the Rope, when all race traitors, Jews, and people of color were lynched. The idea of a race war igniting with smaller acts of terror goes back to at least the antebellum period, plus there was the even older idea that small events can ignite a revolution. But the Turner Diaries gave a step-by-step plan which terrorists have used ever since. Some Aryan Nations attendees, led by Bob Matthews, wanted to begin an action group to follow the steps toward race war. 9 initial members swore an oath in 1983 that'd be repeated with a couple dozen more over the next couple years. It didn't have any name at first, hence why people called it the Order, after a Turner Diaries group. But eventually they called themselves the Silent Brotherhood, typically using the German words Bruderschweigen to signify their allegiance to neo-Nazi beliefs, but also illustrating how ignorant neo-Nazis are by the fact that this is an incorrect translation. They started counterfeiting currency to fundraise, but it was so poorly made that at least 2 got caught in the process of trying to pass it. When one Aryan Nations attendee became too boastful at bars about the potential of the order, they murdered him. Realizing they needed some kind of money and that counterfeiting didn't work, they tried some legitimate means like clearing wilderness habitats and selling wood, but that was not easy or lucrative enough. So they moved on to robbery. They robbed a porn shop, a couple banks, and some armored cars, making sure to travel far away to lend themselves anonymity. One of those was a Brinks truck in Ukiah, California, netting them $3.8 million. That robbery was the source of their demise, because Matthews dropped his weapon, which could be traced. With massive illicit funds, they sent a sizable chunk to other white supremacist groups, created a secret communications network, and began recruiting to create a guerrilla army, setting up a large training camp for those new recruits. They conducted several bombings, mostly of synagogues and porn shops, but without casualties. A shock jock in Denver named Alan Berg ridiculed the radical right on a number of occasions, so the order gunned him down outside his apartment. One of the killers was David Lane, who used his fame to coin the 14 words that have become a consistent dog whistle ever since. If you've seen graffiti that says 1488, that's referring to this racist slogan, plus the 8th letter of the alphabet, as in Heil Hitler. Even Tucker Carlson slipped this neo-Nazi bigotry into his Fox News show, which was the most popular on cable television at the time. Hiding the number 1488 in something is a useful dog whistle for white supremacists, so they can pretend to be reasonable while obfuscating their racism behind fear-mongering about immigrants replacing so-called legacy Americans, an obvious lie that has become very popular among Republicans. Bigots get banned in my comment section. The order has that long-standing of an effect on the radical right. They planned ever larger operations, such as poisoning water supplies, blacking out major power stations, raiding a money distribution center, and carrying out many more assassinations. They were indeed following the Turner Diaries. But the FBI was building a case on them. Several members had been arrested for associated crimes, including Gary Yarborough, who had a warrant on him. When an informant met Matthews and Yarborough in the Portland hotel, SWAT moved in, but blundered the raid, killing a bystander. Matthews escaped with a bloodied hand, and he severely wounded an officer in the process. They caught Yarborough jumping from a window. A bunch of the gang regrouped on Whidbey Island in Washington. Matthews wrote a bunch of letters, including a manifesto declaring war on Zog. Someone snitched and law enforcement descended on the island. Some terrorists escaped the crackdown, but Matthews remained, waiting for a few Canadian members to call him. When police surrounded him, he engaged in a brief shootout with a machine gun, hitting a few. They tried to tempt him out, even bringing some captured gang members to talk to him, but eventually tried to smoke him out, and he refused to leave, burning alive in a bathtub. The rest of the members were easily rounded up with only a few minor shootouts, none with serious casualties. Most received very high sentences in conjunction with their misdeeds. RICO charges allowed the FBI to indict dozens of radical white supremacists who had some sort of involvement with the order or had taken their donations, which prevented Aryan nations from having their annual convention a couple times, and initiated successful crackdowns on a few other organizations like the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord, or CSA. There had been many such terror groups in American history, and there would be plenty more, one even calling itself the Second Silent Brotherhood, and setting off a few inconsequential bombs before getting caught. The original order is still quite influential among the radical right, especially their usage of the Turner Diaries. In only 2 years, it was the most successful domestic terror organization since the Second Klan of the 1920s. And if the so-called Silent Brothers had kept their silence, they could have done much, much worse. As with any criminal organization, they dislike paperwork, so what we can learn about them is only from investigative evidence and testimony, from well after the fact. But the Silent Brotherhood was awfully talkative after they got caught, allowing for a huge amount of information. It is still relatively recent and somewhat obscure to most scholars, so the order has not quite achieved a comprehensive history book, but it has had coverage from journalists, criminologists, and sociologists. This movie was based on a pretty important one from 1989, written by 2 reporters. Historians place it as part of the larger radical right, like a terrorist arm of the movement as a whole. That larger movement is well studied. The problem is there are so many different groups, part of what they called leaderless resistance. You'll notice that the right appropriates much of left-wing ideas, and this disjointed cell-style terror network is something Maoists had perfected. The Turner Diaries was basically Maoism for the right. The nature of leaderless resistance is that there are a bunch of fractured groups working toward one goal. The goal is white supremacy of some sort. In the case of the Order, it was white nationalism or separatism, as in creating an ethno-state. Such racism is on the rise again, and I am happy to see a movie raising awareness about it, despite its flaws. The movie begins somewhat after the Order had formed with the killing of that boastful attendee. They depict the first bank robbery, which I thought showed them accidentally shooting themselves, but that was just a red dye pack.
Yeah, no, just a dye pack exploded.
There's the counterfeiting operation, setting up the training facilities.
That you're building a militia. Needed someone to train them.
Their first armored car robbery, Berg assassination, Ukiah robbery, Portland shootout, and Matthew's final demise. The events are a little bit out of order, but that doesn't affect the narrative. With a few major exceptions, this shows exactly what it needs to and keeps the story exciting. One thing I expected them to omit was all the white supremacist ideology. It would be very easy to tell this story without going into detail, especially since it'd likely be a bunch of boring exposition. But instead, they not only cover the Aryan nation's doctrine of Christian identity and ethno-nationalism, but do it well.
We believe Christian whites deserve a white homeland.
The promised land is not for the Jews, but for the true Israelites, the Caucasians.
They really shine a spotlight on how pernicious the Turner Diaries' influence has been.
There's 6 steps in that book: recruiting, fundraising, armed revolution, domestic terror, assassination. Number 6 is Day of the Rope.
They are responsible for a series of robberies and murders, and they are inspired by the doctrine in this book.
A fictional story of a group of white separatists waging a race war against the United States government.
We even see the silly oath the Order swore. That changed over time, but close enough. From all that, you can see how dangerous their ideology is and how belief in it requires violence, hence why there's been so many subsequent groups that followed their example. For that alone, this movie deserves notice. I remember seeing the Turner Diaries at gun shows all the time, and had no idea the hateful connotations. When such bigotry sits unchallenged, it always grows. Hence why by decree of King Richard I, bigots get banned. Thus, this film is effectively challenging public ignorance. Problem is, there are some plot elements that genuinely tarnish that and make me dislike the movie. The law law enforcement side of this story is essentially imaginary, consisting of combining several real people and the boring work of investigation into just a few characters and exciting moments. Amalgamation and time compression is necessary, but there's a few departures that cause issues, and some that even make me ambivalent about the movie's overall utility. There's extra shootouts when there were none. During the Ukiah robbery, they show some random bystander pull a gun and shoot at the robbers, who return fire and kill him. Then when they take off, some cops run over a spike strip. Neither of those things took place. Showing people dying when they did not is maybe something to heighten the stakes, but it happens again. One of the primary officers gets killed during the Portland shootout. No, the cops killed a bystander there, and an FBI agent survived his wounds at the hands of Matthews. That is supposed to be a major plot point in the moral of their story that kinda ruins the film. You see, they're trying to say that the protagonists and Matthews are not really that different, you and I.
Remember when I told you we're not so different, you and I? We're not so different, you and I. See, I did say that. Very clever.
The Berg broadcast that opens this movie frames that message.
You know what my problem is with every fanatic? Is that you're too inept to get by in the world. Your only recourse is to try and curtail the enjoyment of others.
The protagonist is estranged from his family because he's too devoted to finding criminals, to the point of destroying his faith in justice. The deputy who dies is supposed to represent someone who is too good to become so preoccupied. Basically, it's the lose oneself in their purpose kind of plot. And I don't think that's an appropriate message for this topic, especially considering the opposite side of it. They make Butler into a reasonable white supremacist, which is so wrong that I'm baffled why this was included. In the movie, he directly opposes the order, not only through private disdain, but active resistance. He tells Bob,
But do not go down this path. We're not thieves. You've drawn too much attention.
And for some reason, Matthews has a sniper trained on Butler. Could have happened secretly and we'd have no idea. As they leave, he says,
We need to clip that boy's wings.
The movie claims Aryan nations then informed the law about the order. That certainly didn't happen. Bob interrupts a Butler sermon to recruit from the compound in direct opposition to Butler, as though Aryan nations refused to act.
Because that's all it is, isn't it? Talk, talk. You just have to stand there and take it. It is time for us to fight. We're facing the extermination of our history. Will you sit back and allow the nation that our forefathers discovered, conquered, and died for be eradicated, or will you stand up like men and fight to survive?
We'd have some sort of testimony about any of this, but of course we do not. It is just something to feed this witless storyline of Matthews also being too consumed by his cause to realize he's lost. No, Butler not only was fine with the order, having never denounced it, but Aryan nations still actively praises their actions to this day. The order even donated to Butler, who happily accepted the ill-begotten gains. This defective narrative climaxes with the final standoff on Whidbey Island. The protagonist goes into the blaze to save Matthews, who refuses to come out.
Let's go. It's done. Come on.
Of course, no such thing happened. Nobody was that stupid. But this is supposed to show the FBI agent realizing his own extremism in Bob, and desisting from his over-eagerness to enforce the law. The movie then ends with the protagonist going back to where he met Matthews on a hunting trip and Bob was supposedly tailing him, making some perfunctory closing of the circle. This is not a helpful way to explain extremism. While the movie nails the ideological background and hits the most important parts of the story, it has this really strange narrative about how extremists always lose themselves and the whole point of their cause and yada yada yada. That just plain does not work, especially when talking about white supremacy. Ultimately, the film was a disappointment.